Good morning, everybody. It is Sunday morning. I am about to push play on this video and upload it. This is very real time. I don't do much ahead of time, unfortunately, for me, but I guess it's just fresh art for you guys. So in this video, I do a lot of rainbow colors, but it's a Jackie rainbow, so it's more fluorescent reds, yellow ochres, things like that. I will show you soon. And I do a lot of brightness in this. So if you are a neutral person, you may not like it for quite some time. Just a heads up there. But in part 2 of this video, which will come out next week, I take a very bright mid-range color palette that I end up with here and transform it completely to a much more sophisticated, high-value contrast pair of paintings. So I hope you enjoy this. Let me know in the comments. And without further ado, here we go. I started out using I really only used the whole time, kind of my own little version of a rainbow, which is fluorescent red, quinacridone gold, yellow ochre, green gold, phthalo turquoise, and Payne's gray. Bonus points if you can tell me which one I did not end up using during this entire painting. I started out thinking I would do something bright and cheery and happy and basically my little unrainbow, where it's the rainbow colors, but not really the rainbow colors. But there's a color represented from most of the colors. Obviously, I started with my fluorescent red. Love it so much. Oh, you know what? I forgot that I used the yellow ochre at all. I was going to say yellow ochre was a color I didn't use. Joke's on me, I used every single color, guys. But some of them only a teeny little bit. The first thing I used was my grease pencil or my China marker, which made the black lines, just to get something down. And as I've mentioned before, sometimes I get too caught up in making details first. So I wanted to be sure that I covered the whole background, at least in this early stage, and then I could move on from there. This is a quinacridone gold. I'm doing more of a glaze. When you do a glaze that is not just on paint, but it's on top of paper as well, it soaks in differently. So you can see where the paint wasn't. That color becomes darker and it just soaks in a lot better, which, depending on your preferences, you may like or not like. So phthalo turquoise, I notice in my work that I don't like to cover up the fluorescent red because I always end up thinking, oh my goodness, there's still so much red here. Is this kind of obnoxious? And sometimes I think it is, and sometimes I think, no, we need more red. But I do find the pieces are more successful when there's just little red peeking out rather than an oppressive amount of fluorescent red. So more on that in a bit. This I was just playing with some negative space. I put the paint down in a little ring and I'm just pulling it out on all the sides with a color shaper. Now you may notice, as I noticed, that this is very bright and very intense and not a soothing, relaxing piece of artwork. Super relaxing to do and to make. Adding a little Payne's gray here too, just to get some dark value. But again, not covering up very much to do it. So I'm realizing that I need to do some pretty major changes here from just this very boisterous fiesta-like background. But I'm still trying to figure out in my mind what that's going to be. So first things first, get the background taken care of. I wanted everything covered. You don't have to cover everything. The things I say here are not must-dos, they're just things that I like to do. If that wasn't painfully obvious. Okay, so I have some bright, I have some dark. I'm missing light values. So, oh, I also spritz a little bit of water just to get some of the other layers pulled back in. But I am very much missing a light value. Enter my white China marker. I like China markers because they glide on very nicely, but also they don't smudge if you paint over them. And they're fairly opaque. I mean, the black one obviously is very opaque. The white one does stick out well, but there are times that I wish it was a little bit punchier. Looks great on the Payne's Gray though, gotta admit that. So this is the case where I added some white, but clearly not enough. It's still very intense and like, I don't know, Miami Beach meets Times Square. There's a lot. It's very extra right now. One of my favorite ways to tone things down is to put collage on top, especially if it's tissue collage, because then I get the bottom layers to show through. So inside those little Cheerio shapes is just plain tissue paper, so the background would show through there. I added one piece of tissue paper there, and I started pulling out all of my white tissue papers that would have a substantial amount of white on them. None of them felt opaque enough. I'm going through this very fast because I did not use any of them. And that little piece of collage is actually the only piece of collage I used in this whole project. I decided I was going to go a little bit Judy Woods and make some masks. So masks are just, it's like masking tape, right? You mask off part of the painting that you do not want paint to go on. And it's a bit like a stencil. A stencil is a type of mask. But I wanted to make my own masks so that it wasn't, a uniform type stencil. I highly encourage this because, again, it's another way, just like when you use your own collage paper in collage, it's another way to double down on making your art your art. Because no one's going to make the same masks that you make, especially if you don't use a store-bought template. And if you make your own masks, you're really just making your mark on top of more of your marks. So it compounds to be even more original than it would have been otherwise. At least that's what I think. See how that's a nice negative space there? So it shows all the detail that was in the other part. And I wasn't sure how much I wanted to extend that, but more on that later. And I'm using a Post-it note as a palette. I don't recommend that, but I didn't see my paints handy. I didn't see my palette handy, so I just went with it. And I'm using Celadon, but I'm using it out of a tube. So I'm using heavy body Celadon because I want it to be opaque. The heavy body paints really cover nicely. It's just a smooth, thick layer. And if those of you who are thinking, oh my gosh, she covered up so much. Yes, I did. um, it was almost too opaque. So you're not the only one thinking that. And I quickly realized that maybe it was a little too extreme for what I wanted because I did like so much of the background. However, we can take care of that with some baby wipes or just some wet paper towels. Because this is thicker paint, you're more able to, manipulate it after you've put it on. Taking some paper to lift off some layers. And you can go in for quite a while. I mean, this is acrylic paint, so like not oil level lengths, but if you put it on a couple minutes later, you can still get some off. It will be more of an organic removal because whatever parts are dry are going to stay dry. And if it's not fully dry, you can probably carve some out. As I'm doing this, I'm not thinking, oh, this is exactly the effect that I wanted to get. As I was doing this, I was like, okay, I guess I'm taking all of this off. I was basically, my mind was following my hands in this instance. Wasn't sure what the plan was. I just went with it. Same thing for cutting these masks. I didn't have a plan. I find that with my art and just my style, not having a plan typically works better than having a plan. Otherwise, things feel too contrived to me. It does not mean it's wrong to have a plan, by all means. As I was lining that up, I realized that it was a lot of vertical. Since the one next to it was also very vertical, I decided to switch things up. Decided to do 2 masks at once. And I did that because I wanted them spaced a certain amount apart. Again, I don't know why. I just wanted to do it. It was really fun playing with the masks, I will say. You need to be careful because if you pull the brush toward the mask, you're likely to get paint underneath it, which is not what you want if you want a clean edge. Typically that's when you use a mask if you want a clean edge. So you might need to clean it up just a little bit with some paper towel or a baby wipe. Easy peasy. And you don't want to wait on that. Do that right away if you want to clean up an edge. This little flower shape reminds me of like a video game flower, like Super Mario something. Now, I should point out that there is an entire part 2 to this project because the part I'm doing now was fun and kind of playful and light and easy breezy. Part 2, I add a ton of dark values and some more light values, but I get far away from this mid-tone situation. I thought about combining the videos. It was such a change in the second video that I wanted to keep them separate because I think they're both interesting as they are. And they both are so different that it's almost definitely 2 separate projects. So stay tuned for part 2 next week. But for part 1, I'm still trying to figure out what to do on the left side. The right side, it's a little half and half from a volume perspective. So half of it is the background excitement and half of it is the Celadon cool down quiet part. I'd rather those, that wasn't half and half. However, at least it has some interesting shapes to it. So I was fairly okay with that side. The left side, I'm not liking that flower shape on the bottom that the Celadon outline makes is like half of the page. I don't like that that's where it went. I wish it was more than half the page, like 2/3 or 1/3, but here we are. I used a paper towel roll just to get up any extra wet paint or any water after I've sprayed water. Because when you spray water, it kind of goes everywhere, not just where you want it. And before I added paint, I wanted to make sure that was the case. So as you can tell, lots of paint getting added. And you might be thinking, well, that's a lot of paint. And I was thinking the same thing. So should you think that I have this huge major plan that you're just unaware of, you would be mistaken. I have positions I put myself in but I don't know that I'd call them calculated. It's just a way to play. This is a color shaper. This is one of the cool things about color shapers. If you're using a heavy body paint or an open paint that doesn't dry very fast, you can essentially carve through like a little squeegee. And you can see where that paint is more dry than the other paint. So my larger color shaper did not work. But I did take quite a bit off with the spray bottle. And even though the paint was fairly dry, the water bottle did leave a couple marks where I was able to pull them away from the Celadon. And here I go, taking more paint off. And it's a substantial amount of paint, but I kept going. And this is basically where I ended up with these. Still more work to do. Definitely lots of mid-tone colors here. I hope you will watch next week's round 2, part 2, because these will again completely change. As much as these change from white paper to rainbow paper, in part 2 they change from rainbow paper to complete 180 into a very sophisticated, high value contrast, light and dark, 2 separate paintings. Okay, so I hope to see you next week for part 2, and I would love your thoughts on the color explosion here. Is it happy for you? Is it obnoxious for you? If it's obnoxious for you, just tell me nicely. And I will look forward to showing you what I ended up with after this session. Bye, everybody.